So what we're going to talk about tonight is we're going to be talking about quilting for show, because it now begins the new cycle of the show season as deadlines. We've got some deadlines in September for the big shows. Quilt shows go on all year long in all different parts of the country. And so I've had a couple people ask me, that they were interested in doing some quilts for like the county fair. And I do encourage anybody who does quilt to put your quilt in some kind of a show. So why? You think, oh, you lost your mind, I'm not doing that. Okay, why? Bottom line, we love to go to quilt shows, but quilt shows need quilts or nobody's going to come to the quilt show. So it's a good place to show off your work. And for one thing, there is no greater high on earth other than the birth of a child is to seeing your quilt hung correctly in like a gallery type setting with proper lighting. And it's like, oh my God, it's a feeling like you'll never get again. And it was absolutely wonderful. So I do encourage you to do it. For one thing, if you want to get your name out there, say you're interested in teaching or writing a book, it's good to get your quilts out on the show circuit so people will learn your name. So that's one reason. Another reason is, especially the local shows, you usually get free admission. So yeah, that's a plus. If you enter a quilt or you're a prize winner of a quilt, you usually get into the quilt for free. Sometimes you have to do some things, like at Houston, if you're a prize winner, because you didn't pay for classes, you didn't pay for admission, any of that when you're a prize winner. But you had to sit with your quilt and answer questions and do the white glove type thing. I love, and that's one thing, when I'm around a local quilt show, I love to do white glove duty, because you get to touch the quilts with the white gloves. So that's fun. You get to like look on the back, because they don't let you touch the quilts, and I know why. Okay. Another thing is that you get validation. So a lot of times we don't know, are we quilting well? Are we doing things? Are we on the right track? Are things improving? Is it good? Is it bad? We're always looking for some feedback on whether we're improving or not. And yes, your quilt teachers and your guild members are going to be helpful and supportive, but a lot of times they're more supportive than critical. Because I'm sure not going to tell somebody who's a friend of mine, like, you really need to do this, this, or this. It's got a problem, We don't do that to each other. At least nice people don't, So, if you want good criticism from somebody who doesn't know you, this is a good thing to do. And I will guarantee you that whenever you do one quilt and you get your feedback, your next quilt is going to be doubly good. You're going to improve a whole lot. And every time you do, and that's really why I did it, because a lot of times at the beginning, I was more self-taught. There weren't very many quilt teachers back in the old days, with the stone tablets. So I had YouTube videos, but they don't give you any feedback. And I would look at it and I liked it, but you know what? I didn't know anything. There weren't a lot of books, and all the books were written for hand quilters, and like, I'm not doing that. So yes, it was a good place to get feedback, and I did improve a lot after every single show quilt that I did. Okay, another time you might want to be able to sell your quilts. You might have so many of them, so enter them into a show, and then a lot of times you can sell your quilts from there. I've done one where I sold it at a quilt show. I regretted it because I want it back, but that happens. Okay, and then how I got into it mostly is because my friend talked me into it. I have a dear friend, and I think I've talked about her before. Her name is Shoko Ferguson, and Shoko Ferguson is a marvelous hand quilter and a marvelous needle turner, and her work is impeccable. She has won the big prizes. I mean, and we're talking best of shows at the huge things like Paducah and Houston, the two biggest shows in the world, really. And she's won, and we were talking about it one day, and she said, Geri, the only difference between mine and everybody else's quilts is that I enter and they don't. I'm no great genius. Things are not that wonderful. But I just put my heart and soul into it, and what comes, comes. And she was right. because all quilts are beautiful. If you've ever looked at the quilts of the G Bend River, and they used to be at the Corcoran Museum downtown in DC when I went to see them several years ago, and they're magnificent quilts. Don't get too close to them because they're all ratty. There's not a single straight seam, a single straight anything. The bindings aren't wonderful. I mean, nothing is wonderful technically, but they're magnificent, treasured quilts. So all quilts are beautiful because they reflect you. Okay, so which shows? There's lots of shows. There's local shows, there's regional shows, there's national and international shows, which is right for you. So you don't want this to be a bad experience, and you want to start out, usually you start out slow. I was stupid enough to start at the big ones, but you know, because I didn't know what I didn't know. So a lot of times a good place to start is your local county or state fair. Or guilds. If you belong to a guild, a lot of times the guilds will run a quilt show, and those are a lot of fun. They're usually non-juried, and what juried means is that you send in a photograph or several photographs of your quilt, and then they get hundreds of them, and then they contact you to say, yes, you've made the cut. I don't know what their cut was, but send it in. And then you send it in, and then your quilt gets judged in person, and then it's displayed magnificently. And there's even a few online ones where they're strictly photographs. There's nothing, and that happened a lot during COVID because there were a lot of virtual quilt shows. Okay, so let's see, some regional ones. Some of these regional ones are tougher than the national ones. And by that I mean like the Mid-Atlantic. I've entered that several times. And then there was the Pennsylvania Quilt Extravaganza, which is another Mancuso show. Those are tough. And a lot of time, and was it MQX, Machine Quilters Expo, which was in New Hampshire one year, and the New England Quilt Festival. These are all regional ones. But you have a lot of the really big name quilters still entering those, and you know, there's times like, why do I bother? You know, why do you bother? So you can learn something. That's why you bother. Because they won't last forever either. So, okay. And it is good to go and to see these big quilt shows, because even the top winners and the top names, those quilts are not perfect. They are not, no quilt is ever going to be perfect. And that's fine. And it's good to see that, yeah, you know, Alex Anderson makes a mistake, or, you know, so it's good to see that, because you realize, you know, you're just as good as the big names, because you are. Okay, so like there's the ones that are local to the DC area is the Mid-Atlantic, and near Williamsburg, or Hampton Roads is what it's called, in February. So that's coming up next year, and I don't know when the deadline is for that. Then there's the Pennsylvania Quilt Extravaganza in Philadelphia. That's coming up in September. And that one I'm thinking I might get a couple of friends and we'll do a road trip up there, because that's only a couple hours drive for us. One of my favorite quilts to enter in a local show is the Vermont Quilt Festival, which is, I think it's every June or every other June. And reason I like that one is non-juried. And non-juried, I think they say first 500 quilts that show up at our door are in. Bottom line, or the first ones that respond are in. But what I like to do is get it in there really fast, because that's got the best judging. And we'll talk about the rules and the judging procedure. To me, the Vermont is the best on the judging. So if you're wanting to learn where you need to improve, that's one of my favorite ones to enter. Because, in fact, I've got one show quilt, and I don't know where I put it, but I'm working on a needle turn and a hand quilting. And I've never done hand quilting, or I've only entered one hand quilt in a show. And yeah, it's hard to do, but this is a small one I'm working on. And that I'm going to eventually finish. I've been working on this quilt for 12 years now. It's not done yet, okay? Then you've got your international and the national quilt shows, which are Houston, Paducah, all of the AQS shows, the Hoffman Challenge, the I think there's Hoffman Challenge. There's a few of them that are out there, and you know that those are fun. I've entered Houston. In fact, I have 2 Houston ribbons. Here's the fancy Houston ribbons. It says IQA on it. And I'll show you the quilts. I'm not dragging out all the quilts, but I do have some of them here for you. And like, I've got a few of these. But, you know, and I have some this is from my local guild. And this one was this local guild. I have some from Solderly's, which was a local quilt show, local quilt and embroidery show, and I'll show you that quilt in a little bit. And the Hoffman Challenge, I really liked it. Sometimes people will enter for the prizes that they get. You can get money. I believe Best of Show at Houston was like a $10,000 prize. My 2 second ones got, I think it was years ago. I don't know what it is now, but it was like $700. So like that about paid for the trip. And here was the other reason I entered Houston, the big one, because I wanted to go to Houston. And my husband said, "You want to go where? For what? You want to go to Houston for a quilt show?" I don't think so. So the deal was, if I entered Houston and I actually won a prize, I have to go to accept it, right? You know, so yeah, I think I worked my heart out just so that I could go, because otherwise, you know, he would balk at the price. So yes, I think I broke even that year, because, you know, by the time I paid for the hotel and the plane fare, I about broke even, and that's okay. But I had a great time just doing it. Okay, it's like Hoffman Challenge. Yeah, the Hoffman Challenge I liked because I got, instead of money, if you got a prize, you got all of the, you got a fat quarter of every single thing in the Hoffman Batik line. So I got like 40, 50 fat quarters, so that was wonderful. I think my first one was called Miniatures of the Heart. There was a magazine called Miniature Quilt Magazine, and it's out of publication now. But their grand prize was every single ruler and rotary cutter and everything else that Olfa made. So I have, or Omnigrid made. So I got all that, and I was just thrilled, you know, because I had one ruler, a 6x12. That was it. Didn't have any more. So now I'm a ruler junkie. Like, they're everywhere. So that's you know, that's why I entered that one. So anyway, a good source for finding out where quilt shows are is if you go to on the internet. It's called Quilting Hub, QUILTINGHUB. quiltinghub.com, and they've got a listing by state of all the quilt shows that are coming up in the next year or so. What's the judging process? It's like, okay. The judging process, number one, is how they judge it. Every quilt is going to be different. Every judge is going to be a little bit different. So when you're looking at the judges, or sometimes they'll tell you in the entry form who's being the judge, but most of the time they don't tell you who the judges are. And so you really don't know. Judges can be certified or uncertified, and there's a process, I think, through the IQS, or I think it's International Quilt Society, I'm not sure, that they have an actual course and whatnot you have to do. You have to apprentice and all that to be a certified judge. Certified judges are going to be at your national shows. You're rarely, if ever, see a certified judge at a local show, and that's fine. So you don't know what you get. Usually, who judges are, they're usually very experienced quilters. They're people or teachers that are in the area, people who've been authors of quilt books, people who've won a lot of prizes at quilt shows and stuff. That's who's usually the local judges are. And I've judged a couple county fairs, and that was fun. I like to judge kids when kids do stuff, because I love to see kids doing stuff, because they're so imaginative. Their stuff is amazing. Not perfect, and that's okay. That's what makes it wonderful. Okay, so, and then sometimes you don't know what their emphasis is. A lot of it depends on what's the theme of the show. Maybe judging is being geared towards a particular theme or something that they want. Like sometimes it may be a show that's like QuiltCon. There's one called QuiltCon. It's in California. It is an art show. In other words, it's only for art quilts. And then you'll have another one like, well, the Hoffman Challenge is a considered themed quilt show, because the Hoffman Challenge says that you have to use their fabric and so much of it, of a particular piece of fabric that they've decided that that's their challenge. And so it's themed to that. So a lot of times you want to read your rules and the statements of what the show is telling you what they want. And sometimes it's just judges' preference as to whether a quilt is going to win or not. There are some judges who are heaped in loving traditional quilts. There's others that are art quilters, and that's what they look for. There's artists, also artists. So it depends on who the judges are. I honestly don't care whether mine wins or not, and I don't care what the judges usually have to say, because a lot of it is subjective. And a lot of times the results of a quilt show will be on what has been entered. Say you have a quilt show where they've got an abundance of red quilts. Well, if your quilt's red, odds are it's not going to stand out. So therefore, it's probably not going to win. Or if you have another one where the predominantly is hexagons, say it's a traditional quilt show, and all they've gotten was hexagons all over the place. Well, if you have a hexagon, odds of you winning is going to be kind of slow. And sometimes it helps to look at the categories or to visit a show, because the fewer entries in that category, is the likely chance you're gonna get a prize. But like I said, how many entries they get does make a difference. Let's talk about what the judging. Most of the time when you get your quilt back, you're going to get maybe a statement from 1, 2, or 3 judges, and it's usually one sentence. Those are not very helpful, never have been. They go, great use of color. Okay, big deal. That tells me nothing. I want to know how to improve. That didn't tell me anything. I've gotten a few of them where they said batting needs to be improved, and I'm like, what's wrong with the batting? And so I took it to Shoko. She says, oh, you can feel the batting through at the edges. That batting has to be nice and full and thick. And I went, oh well. She says, you can fix it. And she showed me how to fix it. And another time I got a feedback where my borders were ripply in the middle because it was unevenly quilted. And again, Shoko had a fix for that too. She says, take elastic thread and a needle and go up and pull it a little bit, and then do a little bit more and go between the layers and straighten it out. That worked. So yes. So like I've learned how to make things better. And then the next time, make sure that I didn't do those borders all wonky like that. So when you get your comments back, if they're talking about something specific, like your stitching needs to be more even, like if they're talking about the quilting, that the stitches are not even, okay, you need to improve on that. Or if your tensions are off. If they're telling me something technical that I can wrap my hands around and improve on, okay. If they say, oh, nice use of color, or, oh, needs more quilting, okay, that's subjective. One of them, they didn't like my quilting thread. They just hated it. They said, the thread's inappropriate for the quilting motif. I went, what's that mean? Again, Shoko says, use silk thread. Works every time. And I did. Okay, now what I like is, like the Vermont quilt is a pointed system. And what I like about theirs is, that's why they limit it to so many quilts, because this type of quilting is more intensive a work for the judges. So they can't have a whole lot of them, because they've got to rate them on a bunch of different things. Like with Vermont, you have 100 points total, okay? So 40 visual impact is usually the first thing. Now, what does that mean? That means the quilt pops and calls you into its center. So it's a visual impact. How, when you look at it, are you apt to say, wow, that's what that is. So, and that's 15 points maximum. So, you know, some of these art quilts are just super contrast and will come at you with a pitchfork. So, and they're very visually impactful. So, you know, but they only limit 15 points to that, because some shows are going to be more treading on the technical, other ones are going to be more on the art. Okay, then you have design, which for Vermont is only worth 40 points of the total. 20 points is your maximum for use of the pattern and the design. That's kind of subjective, but you know, they'll usually tell you if it's a high score, they don't say anything. You get a lower score, they usually put a little note there why they gave you a low score. That's why I like this quilt show. Okay, then it was 10 points for an effective use of color in an overall design. Overall use of color, the effectiveness of color is one thing that will help you get through that, is the use of the color wheel. Stay with those, you know, try, or, you know, all the contrasting, whatever colors from the color wheel, and you can't go wrong. So, okay, then you have suitability. 5 points is suitability of materials. If they see polyester fabric in there, they're usually going to say it's not suitable. That's what that usually means. I even saw one quilt, and for Vermont, this one wouldn't do very well. That we went to, my friend Millie and a few of us, we went to a quilt, I think it was Quilt Odyssey in Pennsylvania. And there was one, it was art quilts. Well, I didn't understand the concept of an art quilt. I thought it was downright silly, some of the stuff they put in there. There was this quilt, and it was a train, and they used matchsticks to make the tracks of the train. I went, okay, that's weird. You know, not just plain old matches all over the place. I thought, that's not comfortable. So probably in Vermont, that one wouldn't have done very well, because, you know, matchsticks don't belong in a quilt, I don't think. Okay, then you have another 5 points for border treatment. So if you didn't put any border on your quilt, you don't get any points for that. Okay, then you have 45 points, which is the most of the overall for workmanship. 20 points is your precision of the work, both the front and the back, the top and the back. They're going to look at the precision. This is where they're going to be looking at, do the seams match? Do they intersect correctly? Are the points chopped off? Are the points floating out in air and they weren't supposed to be? Is your stitching tensions good? Is your, you know, well, if you're sewing tensions, if you seeing puckering in your seams, all kinds of stuff like that. That's all the technical stuff with the piecing. Or if it's an applique, are you seeing points? You know, that like you're seeing points instead of smooth curves. Are you having lumpy globs on the points? Are they sharp? All of that technical stuff. This is the part I like the best, because I can improve my workmanship. Sometimes I can't improve my taste and my sense of art, because I don't really have one. Okay, and then you have 20 points for the quality of the quilting or the needlework. So a lot of these have needle turning, or you have embroidery, all kinds of things are going to judge the quality of that work. And then 5 points, which is binding and edgings, and that first one I entered in Vermont got 0. Or no, I think I got 1 point for the binding. And it's things like, do you see it rippled? Are the corners rounded? Are your miters sewn? Do you like that done? Are they even front and back? Are they full of batting? So that's what they're looking for there. Okay, so that's what the point system is really important to me. Okay, then you have why you don't want to do this. Okay, cons, it's nerve-wracking. When you are quilting for show, a lot of times it's best to take a quilt you've already done, and if you think, you go, oh, it turned out good, and it's a local show, enter it, don't think about it. When I am quilting specifically for a show, for a competition, it's very nerve-wracking. Very nerve-wracking. You need to have a little bit thick of skin if you're very sensitive to critiques, both by the the written critiques you get from the judges, or even showing up at your quilt and listening to what people say. Sometimes people are rude, and, so, and it does happen. And the other thing is it can get expensive. The big shows, the ones where you're going to have to mail your quilt, you have to get pool noodles and archival tissue paper and boxes and things to line it, so if the package gets wet, it's not affected. Also, the shipping can be expensive too, so it's not cheap. There's also entry fees. Some of them, most of them are maybe at the most $20–$30 to enter a show. Yet, if you're not going to, you have no chance of winning, and you're going to spend, it used to cost, I figured it cost me about $300 to enter a show by the time I did the shipping. And of course, other things. I will quilt with silk thread because it's extremely fine and it looks very good. Well, that's expensive. I'm not going to use warm and natural batting. Why? Because when you fold it in a box, and it's sitting there in shipping, going across the country, and they take it up, and it's hung up, you see those lines, and that's like, oh my God, that's not my quilt. I don't know who did that. That was a mess. That happened to me at Mid-Atlantic. I just folded it, stuck it in a box, and it hung up, and it had all these square lines going this way and that way. I thought, oh, that looks terrible, and so yes, it's expensive to mail those quilts properly. And you have to be careful. Quilts can get dirty and they can get lost in the mail. When I did the miniatures of the heart, because with one quilt, it won in its category, and those usually go on Hoffman quilts, Hoffman Challenge, and miniatures of the heart, and a few other ones that not only when you either win or don't win, when you give them your quilt for judging, they have it for a year. So you're, like, what's going to happen to my quilt? Because it goes all over the world. You don't know what happens to your quilt. And it's scary because you may not get it back. Especially miniatures of the heart, because right as soon as I sent everything off and it was judged and the announcements were made as to who won, the quilt, or the magazine went out of business. And I thought, I'm never going to see that quilt again. I was like, okay, well, I did get it back. So I actually did. Okay, let's just look at a few of them. This is my very first show quilt. Okay, like I said, number one, let's talk about some tips. Number one, number two, number 20, 40, and 50 is read the rules of the quilt. This is 2 pages of the rules for the Paducah show. The AQS show in Paducah, it's 2 pages. You have one whole page, which is nothing but categories. Like, some of these, I don't even know what they are. There's 16 different categories in just one show. And then it's got 15 different rules, and they talk about everything in there. Everything. You go through those rules one by one and make sure that you have met all of the criteria for that particular rule. The biggest reason I think Paducah has problems with some of their entries is that they're entered into the wrong category, and it happens a lot at the shows. You think it's this, they think it's something else. And some shows will reassign it to a different category, other ones instantly disqualify it, so who knows. Okay, so yes, make sure, read those rules. And there's some, there's some, like you have to take pictures of them and all that stuff. We'll go over some of that. Okay, so you want to determine your style. Does your style fit with the show that you're trying to enter? Not so much for the juried shows, yes. For the local county fairs, no, you're probably fine. Just enter it, and they're wonderful. They're fun to do. Okay, it does help to strive for originality. You're more likely to get a better job, get a better result on something that you've designed yourself than using someone's pattern or their technique. If you are using someone's pattern, I do have to read the rules of the show. Some shows tell you that if it's a pattern, you have to get a release from the designer saying that you can enter that show with their pattern. if you, and that's really one of the reasons I don't do too many shows, because, you know, like I quilt for what I want, and I'm going to take part of this pattern, part of this pattern, part of that picture, part of that ever, and it's a mishmash, and I don't even remember what technique or pattern I used by the time it's done. So, you know, that's for me. I'm not going to enter that. Especially a national show, they're going to ask for those releases. I did one of Venice, and I will finish it just for me, because I can't even find the person who did. It was from a poster that I got while we were in Europe 30 years ago. Can't find the artist anywhere. Can't even find the publisher. So I'm never going to get a permission for that, and that's fine. Okay, let's see. So like I said, it helps to do something original. And when you do it for a show, keep your source work. So if you've taken a picture of a flower or whatever, and you're going to draw it up, keep that picture with the entry work, so that if you ever have to prove it's your own work, you can. You know, this is, hey, I took this picture on my Canon camera. Okay, let's see. Pay attention to the colors and the mood that they invoke. And solids tend to be more successful than prints, especially novelty prints, unless you are doing an applique. So pay attention to the colors. Like I said, if you know, just follow the rules of color. You can always find out, you know, online what reds will invoke, what yellows will, greens will invoke, that kind of thing. Unless the contest has rules, consider using 2 layers of batting for that quilt, or use wool batting, because it will enhance the quilting. Okay, you want anything that will make the judge look at it twice or take a little bit longer, especially in the big shows. There's times where they will have 100 quilts in one category. And usually what they do is they're stacked on a table, however high, and usually the first thing they do is they will take the stack and fan through it. They'll sit there and flip through it, all of them, so everybody, yep, we got 40 red ones and 20 yellow ones, whatever, you know. So then usually what they do is they will take their hand in whatever corner and they scratch the corners. They scratch the thread where the quilting is. If they hear that click, 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 you got tension problems. Off the table it goes. It could be the most gorgeous quilt designed by God himself, but if it's got bad tensions, it's gone. So I always tell her, make the corners of your quilts perfect. You know, make sure the tensions are perfect there, because that's where they're going to, because they don't even look. They can quickly go, and one after another, pull one like, yep, nope, nope, yep, you know, so yes, because usually they have about 30 seconds per quilt to judge it on those big shows. It's like, oh dear, you know, and that's hard on the judges. You know, they don't like to say bad things about quilts, and they don't like to be rushed. I don't blame them. Okay, let's see. And like I said, using 2 layers of batting or wool batting does make your quilting look a lot better. Okay, successful quilting either captures your interest or it calms things down. By that saying, when you have really tight quilting, it's going to push that to the background, and whatever isn't quilted pops forward towards you, or towards you. Okay, and anything that's loosely quilted, it's going to pop out. You know, it's going to be fluffy. If it's all over, not, you know, all the same, they say ½ an inch apart, it's all going to blend together. But it depends on what you want to do. If your quilting design, or if your quilt design, the top, is what you want to emphasize, tone it down on the quilting. You don't want the quilting to be taking it away. You want to calm everything else down, smash it down, and let your quilt come forward. The pattern of the fabric come forward. If you want it to capture interest, you put it someplace where it's unexpected, you know. So a lot of times people complain of show quilts being bulletproof. They're quilted so close together they can stand up on their own, and I'm guilty of that. That's how I quilt. I like it really close together. But, you know, a lot of people don't, and that's fine. Okay, it helps to use a finer weight thread. I like to quilt with So Fine, which is a 50 or a 60 weight thread. I like to use my YLI Silk 100. It's expensive, but it's worth it because I never have trouble with thread breaking, and it just is gorgeous. Okay, now number 1, tensions, tensions, tensions. They don't want to see eyelashing or the little clicking lumps. It would also helps to use the same thread top and bottom, or at least same color thread, because if your tensions aren't perfect, you can't tell at first glance. Say you have, a lot of times people will use all white on the back and then change colors on the top, and then you look on the back and you see little tiny dots of color. Well, that's extremely hard to fix. I mean, it's hard to get that tension when they're different colors to be perfect. It's best to have both colors, and you're not going to see something that's a 1/2 millimeter thick, you know. So you want to make sure that your quilt is squared up, and by that it needs to be able to hang straight. It needs to be squared. So what you do, how you tell if your quilt is squared, is if you measure the diagonals. They should be the same if it is squared. If they are not the same, this is different than that, you don't have it squared. I recommend blocking your quilt, and that means move the living room furniture out, especially if it's a big quilt. Get some T-pins, and you can just dampen your quilt, and then take a square, you know, those carpenter squares, and big long 120-inch long tape measure, and take those T-pins. And this is before you bind it. It'd be after it's quilted, but before you bind it. And you're going to stretch it out, and you're going to, and usually what I do is I will spray the whole thing with spray starch while it's still wet so it won't flake. You want to make sure that that spray starch not going to dye or bleach out your fabric. And then you put the T-pins into the corner, or into the edges about 1 inch or 2 inches apart, and let it dry. And there, now your quilt is flat and it is square. So that's, you really don't notice it's square if it's on a bed, whether it's square or not. You hang it up, it's not going to hang right. Okay. A lot of times you need to make sure that you don't have any perfumes, and don't smoke around it, because the smell of smoke will disqualify a quilt immediately. Judges won't deal with it. Also, don't use a lot of perfumes or scented stuff, use scented detergents with it, because if the smell is overwhelming, it's going to disqualify it. You want to make sure you're plumping the binding, and by that I mean it needs to, if you feel the edges, you don't want to feel the edge of the batting. Remember what I told you, I think before, what the fix for that is that if you have a gap, before you sew it in, you take a little sliver strip, like a 1/4 inch strip of batting, and stuff it, then sew it. No one will know. And then, this is before I knew, these are kind of rounded. I'm not totally thrilled with these. So you want these to be square, and you also need to sew down the flaps on the binding. Okay? Let's see. They're usually going to ask for that you have a hanging sleeve, and what a hanging sleeve is this thing on the back that allows, it's usually for, and AQS.com has got a real good tutorial on how to make a hanging sleeve. What it is it sits out from the side a little bit, so that when it hangs and you've got something in here, see, if it were tight, see, I'm going to hold it tight, it's going to bulge out if you put a rod in there. Hanging sleeves, it bulges out towards the back, and the front hangs very, very straight, you know, and it's really nice. And you can put a rod in there. Anything else? Hanging quilt label. You want to put quilt label. A lot of them will tell you to cover up the quilt label, and that's why I like to use my embroidery machine to make the quilt label. And sometimes they'll tell you where to put it. So if you're going to enter this in multiple shows, because one will say they want it in the lower right, one will lower left, one center, whatever. I don't build in the quilt label into the back, that if I need to, I can tear this out and move it to a different place. I've never had to before, but you know, if the minute I really hard sew it in there, yeah, that's when they're going to want to move it. Okay, you want to make sure, again, make sure you have matched seams and points and perfect points. Don't hurry. Okay, if you're hurrying to finish this quilt, you're more likely to make a mistake. Wait till next year to enter it. Also, sometimes I'll say it has to be done within the last year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. Be prepared for that rejection, and don't care if you reject it or you don't make it into the show. And a lot of times, even in the big shows, if they jury you in but you don't win, that is an honor in and of itself. And that's the way it is with the Houston and the Paducah shows. Just to make it into the show is an extreme honor, because, you know, they don't expect. So I think they have 1,000 quilts, which sounds like a lot of people, but when you think over 50 states and all the wonderful quilters we have in our country, that's not a lot. So there's probably about 3,000 who entered it, you know, and only 1,000 were accepted. You may think your quilt is good enough, your friends may think it's quilt enough, or it's good for a particular show, but the judges may not pick it that year, and that could be because, you know, you've got too many red quilts, it's subjective. Don't worry about it. Just learn for the experience. You try another year or try a different show, and it'll be fine. So there we go with, let's talk about, I'll show you some of these. This is my first show quilt, and it's called my grandmother's Brazilian Garden, and the pattern is from Eleanor Burns' what is it called? It's something like Grandmother's Garden is the name of the pattern, but I did Brazilian embroidery, and that's why it's called, which is a 3-dimensional embroidery. So this one was my first show quilt. It was, I did it for Miniature Quilt Magazine, and this is the one that was rejected. They did not accept it. Could have been that I didn't take a good picture. I did, from subsequent ones, I did hire a friend of mine's husband who's a photographer to take the proper pictures, because I can't take a decent picture if my life depended on it. So, you know, Shirley's husband did pictures from then on. So, in fact, the only 2 quilts that I did not get accepted are the ones that I did my own photography. If I had someone else do it, they usually did it right and did a good job. So this is the one. I went there. This one went to the Quilt Odyssey, and my comment back from that was, actually it went to Mid-Atlantic. It was the first place it was miniature quilts, and it didn't do anything there. And then I sent it to Mid-Atlantic, and it didn't do anything there either. However, it got dirty, and I had to wash it. And it was entered and got accepted into Quilt Odyssey up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which that show's non-existent anymore. And I had about a week to mail it off to the next place. And when I washed it, everywhere that was purple or red flowers, because this is rayon thread, bled through to the back, cleared through to the back. So like, how the heck? Now disqualifies this quilt instantly. And it's like, okay, what do I do? Well, you know what I did? This is where I learned to needle turn in a hurry. So anywhere you see a flower is where there's, and it's where it bled through. So underneath here is a big red or purple spot, or green or whatever. So like all of the flowers, I instantly put more greenery around them. Where's the one that I like through? Yeah, where's it? There's one of the purple ones that this one. It didn't have leaves all over the place. It's got leaves now because I put them in there. And this one, I just covered them up, because if you look really close underneath, you can still see the purple staining. And on the back, I covered it up. So I decided this was you've heard of a family tree? I have a family flower pot. Because in each flower, I put somebody in my family's name and their birthday. so that's that one. Okay, so now, it did go to Quilt Odyssey, and the comment I got back from that was the batting comment. So I fixed that. But but they also said didn't have enough quilting, and I thought, okay, I think it's got enough quilting. That's subjective. That's what I care and what I say goes. Because the one that won was in the same category, was nothing but a bunch of stripes that went this way with an occasional line, and they just took the walking foot and went every inch all the way down, and I thought, that's got a whole lot less quilting than mine, and yet mine needed more quilting, and it's like, okay, I'll go figure. That's okay. So then I entered this into a local competition, which was the Solderly Embroidery and Quilting Show, and they had a, it was not juried, but it was a competition, and this won Best of Show in both categories. And they said it epitomized the theme of the show, which was talking about embroidery and quilting, and this combined both. So, yay! I won some, what did I win with that one? It was framing, which I haven't put the picture in the frame yet. Okay, then another quilt that I had was this one. If you remember this one, the latte quilt. I hate this thing. I did 3 of them. This one's on my bed, but it's too big. It's king size. This one also didn't go into anywhere but Solderly's, and it actually got best quilting. Go figure, because I didn't know what I was doing. They must have not had some very good quilters that year. This is the one that won. I don't know what, it's still packed up. I still have quilts packed up in boxes, and this must be in it. This is the one that won Miniatures of the Heart and was traveling around the world. And this is Brazilian embroidery and paper piecing, and the pattern was by Stephen Seifert, and I forgot the other girl's name. But this was a little small quilt, and so this is, I love this one. I still have that one, but it's lots of embroidery. I don't have all the pictures of everything. This one is a picture of what photography needs to sort of looks like. This one was from Houston. This one went to Houston, and this one is the owner of one of those blue ribbon, those red ribbons back there. So this is the overall picture. It looks like that. And then you had to send a detail showing the quilting. So there's another picture. Now I didn't bring the big one up, but when I worked on that one, I worked on a prototype because I wanted to try something different, and I will never do this again. Is that this? It's called Threaded Wedding Ring, and I think I didn't put a label on this. What year is that anyway? I don't even see it. And this one I had, and that one I had appraised. And it's a good idea to get your quilts, those nice quilts, get them appraised, because this king size quilt that's made like this appraised at $6 grand. Told you I can't even afford my own quilts. But they go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they give you information, and if anything, God forbid, happens, the appraisal forms, I should be able to claim, they're claimed as writers on my insurance. But this is the prototype. And the prototype is, this is not fabric. This is machine embroidery that I digitized. So this is an original design. And then I did the quilting. I was just learning to quilt. And this is, and the blocks are, this was done, I think, with a 5x7 machine. I had just the little one. So here, it's got a motif in the middle, okay, that is quilted. However, this is completely reversible, because after I did the stitch in the ditch here, it lined up with the back embroidery that matched in every single thing. And then it also had a scallop border. And so this is the prototype for it, but it's easy to show this one. And then I was trying out something here. Anytime you can give your quilt some pizzazz, and this is the super tiny piping. It's like less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and I put that in there, and it's something in there that'll, like, ooh, what's that? And that's gonna, anytime you can get that judge to look at that quilt for an extra couple seconds, hey, you're more likely to get a prize. So this was fun to do. This was hard to line up. It was, so I'm never doing another one. This is one of my grandchildren's, the big one is one of my grandchildren's wedding quilts. The latte quilt is one that goes to another kid. Okay, then this one, I had it appraised, and you can't see the picture very well. It's also king size, and this is an original design that I did too, using the embroidery machine and needle turn. And this one I had appraised, you know, when I was in, I don't remember where it was. This was an AQS appraiser that did this one, and she's got a picture of it. Where did I put it? Here is using the same technique. This is a different quilt. This one went to MQX in New Hampshire and didn't do a thing. They did not, and their comment was they didn't like the thread. They said the thread was too thick for the design that I picked. Like, okay, whatever. I like it. It's mine. So this is the smaller one. See, this is all needle turn and machine embroidery combination. It's the one that I wrote a book that nobody ever published. So I still have a box full of the book. It was too complex for publishing. That's okay. I had fun doing it. I learned a lot. Okay, and then this one was one of my Hoffman challenges, and this one actually got a prize. I don't remember which one, but this is Hoffman challenge where I got all. And this is also my design too, and it's from an old mandala, and it's machine applique with the embroidery machine. And then I did. It's even got it's got that little tiny piping in the corners, and then you can see I did bobbin work. You can't see it. I've got really thick thread right here to outline and metallic, so that I did some bobbin. Oh, here is also some more bobbin work that I did from the back. So I mean, I was really stretching, trying to learn and trying to do something not so easy. Yeah, here's some more couching, some more of the bobbin work. And what I did was I quilted it in white thread, actually white wash-away thread, turned it over and then quilted it again over top of the wash-away thread, so to get that effect. The other quilt that I have, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I don't have this quilt. This quilt is actually owned by the Rosa Parks Institute, and this is called the Freedom Quilt. And it's on tour around the country for another, well, it should be getting near the end. You know, they should be getting it back. But this is a photograph quilt, again, original design, and it's got, this quilt has been part of the 50th anniversary. I have a dream celebration down on the mall. It's been at the zoo. It's been at the National Archives. It's been at the National Cathedral. It's been statutory hall. So this thing's Library of Congress. It's been a little bit everywhere. Because it's a teaching quilt, and there's even a little booklet that goes along with this quilt that talks about all of these pictures. And it's called Road to Freedom, and there is a song called Road to Freedom, and the words of the song are the yellow line going down the middle of this quilt, middle of the road on the quilt. And these are original pictures taken by Ella McCall Hagen, so and some of her students. So isn't that neat? So this is my pride and joy, and this is the one quilt I do not have, and I did it for them. But it's got some rare pictures. It's got a piece, if I can find it. Let me see. This piece of cloth right here was given to Rosa Parks by Mandela. I think Mandela. And so I had this little piece of it. And so we guarded this with our lives to put in the quilt. And I think there was another one that was. And here's another one, another piece of the fabric, which is this right here is also authentic African fabric from Rosa Parks' collection of scraps. So yes, that's fun. So yeah, Mary remembers. Yeah, I think Ella, I don't know if Ella, I have to call Ella, see how she's doing, because I don't know if she's got the quilt back or if they've got it up at the Institute. So I haven't heard. But it was used to teach the life of Rosa Parks, because it follows her birth all the way up until she passed away, and Medal of Freedom that she got from the president. So that was fun doing. That was a learning experience. That's where I learned the joy of glue. Because literally all these pieces were glued down, and then I opened it up and sewed it down when I got it how I wanted it. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions? And is anybody inspired to please enter at least in the county fair? It's a lot of fun, and usually I get free admission, so it's worth it. And really, I guarantee your next quilt will be better because you entered this quilt. I hope to see you next Thursday at 7. If you have any questions, send me an email at waltzquilt, that's WALTZQUILT, @yahoo.com with any suggestions or comments or like, hey lady, go away. So I will see you. Bye. Love you guys.